What's good, Mission City? How we feeling today? We good? Good. So good to be here. My name is Sean. If we've not met, I would love the opportunity to meet you. Man, a couple of years ago, my wife and I binge watched for the first time ever a show called Friday Night Lights. Anybody ever seen Friday Night Lights? It's a great show. All right, stars Kyle Chandler, Connie Britton. It is about high school football in Texas. And the show was filmed in Austin, Texas. And my wife and I were living in Austin at the time we were watching the show. And so it was kind of cool to see some of the scenes and recognize where they were in town as we watched the show. And at the end of the show, when it wrapped up and it was over, they did this big, public party, a big celebration of Friday Night Lights. And they went to the field where they shot all of the football scenes, and they invited the public, and some of the cast were there, and my wife and I went to go be a part of this big party. Now, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the show, it's 15 years old, it's on you at this point. But, spoiler alert, episode 1 of the entire show, the star quarterback, Jason Street, gets tackled in such a way that it breaks his back and paralyzes him. So episode 1, star quarterback goes from being an all-world athlete to being in a wheelchair. And the rest of the seasons, he's in a wheelchair. So imagine my surprise when we go to this big festival party and Jason Street is walking around, talking to people, introducing himself. He even met my wife. And look at him. He's standing. It's a Texas miracle. He can walk. And I couldn't get over it. I kept telling my wife, he's walking around. And it was at that point that my wife pulled me aside and she said, "Hey, babe, I need you to tell me that you know that this was just a show and these are actors, right?" I was like, yeah. She said, no, I need you to say it. Anyway, I had to come to the realization that these were just actors. It was just a show. And they were just people playing a part. They were people just pretending to be someone that they're not. And in the book of Matthew, chapter 6, Jesus is teaching to a large group of people, and he keeps referring to actors. In fact, he mentions it over 17 times. He keeps talking about actors. And in the Greek word, the Greek word that he uses when he's talking about actors is the word hypokrites. He says, don't be like the hypokrites. And if that word sounds familiar to you, it's the word where we get hypocrite. And Jesus keeps telling these people over and over again, don't be like these actors. When you give, don't be like an actor. When you worship, don't be like an actor. When you serve other people, don't be like an actor. You're not playing a part. You're a real person. And amongst the Greeks and the Romans in the ancient world, there was a high value on performing arts. In fact, every small community would have some kind of theater in which the hypokrites would travel and come and perform. Theater was of a high value to the ancient world. And Jesus uses actors as an illustration for all who would listen and read Matthew chapter 6. Jesus says, you're not actors performing. You're not playing a part. You're real people who are engaged in a real world, and you're in real relationships. You don't have to pretend to be someone that you're not. We're in a series that we're calling The Thing Beneath the Thing. And this is all from a book by a pastor and actually a friend of mine by the name of Steve Carter. I've stolen all this material. I'm not this smart. But if you want to read the book, you should get the book, follow it along. But Steve Carter breaks down thing like this. Week 1, we talked about T-triggers. We talked about the things that set us off. Last week, my girl Jody Hickerson was in the building. Did you guys enjoy her last week? She's amazing. She talked about hideouts. I got to tell you this. One time Jody came and taught. And we got done, and I asked Jayla, I said, what'd you think? And she said, I wish Jody was our pastor. I said, me too. Anyway, she's amazing. Thanks for hanging out. This week, we're going to talk about insecurities. Next week, we're going to come back. We're talking about narratives. And then finally, we're going to wrap the series up talking about grace. But here in week 3, we're going to talk about insecurities. And in the very beginning of the Bible, we are introduced to the first people, Adam and Eve, and God gives them everything that they need to live and thrive. He creates a garden for them to live with Him in. And they live in community together with one another. And God says, you can do anything you want to do, except for one thing. He makes this tree. He says, I don't want you to eat the fruit from this tree. Now, you've been a human long enough to know if somebody tells you you can do anything you want except for this one thing, what do you want to do? Me too. And so Adam and Eve eventually step out of this relationship that they have with God, and they eat from this tree. And some of you may have heard this story before, but Adam and Eve choose to disobey God. They choose to eat from the tree. The one tree God said, just don't eat from there, and they do it. And in doing so, this is what the book of Genesis says in chapter 3, verse 7. It says, at that moment, it says their eyes were open. They suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. Now, this is where there is way more going on here than just body image and shaming. They are ashamed not only at their physical nakedness and exposure, but they are now ashamed of their spiritual failure. They're ashamed of their exposure. They've been found out, and now all they know to do is cover up and hide. And it's in the beginning of time here where insecurity is born. And you and I have been dealing with it ever since. And some of you may be brand new to church, you may be brand new to faith, you may not even know what you believe about God or the Bible, and that's okay. Because today you got to know we're all walking in here on level ground. Because every one of us wrestles with insecurity. You want to know how I know that? You're a human. If you don't, you're welcome to see yourself out. You can catch up next week. No perfect people allowed. We all walk in here with some sense of insecurities in us. Adam and Eve ate from the tree that God said, don't eat from. And in doing so, their eyes were open, and all they knew to do once they were exposed was to cover up and conceal what was really going on. You see, the actors, the hypocrites in the ancient world would travel from community to community with these bags. And inside of these bags were different masks. And they had a mask for every different emotion and every different character that they wanted to play. And they would pull these masks out when they needed to be somebody they weren't, when they needed to cover up their true self. Now, before I spend the rest of this time talking about masks, I need you to hear me say I'm talking about the metaphorical mask that we all put on. I'm not making a statement about health and safety nor a political statement. If this frustrates you, you can email hannah.martin@missioncity.com, okay? But, sorry, I digress. Anyway, this is why Jesus continually goes back to talk about actors in Matthew chapter 6. Those who would carry around these bags of masks pretending to be someone they're not. I got a bag of masks. I think if you're honest here this morning, you do too. We all have these masks that allow us to be characters that just kind of come out in us. When we're exposed and we're vulnerable, we flip a switch, we put on the mask, and we become somebody we're really not. And I want to spend the rest of our time talking about 5 different masks that I think all of us carry in our bag. And we pull them out from time to time, and I want you to know, I'm just curious if any of these seem familiar to you. Mask number 1 is the performer mask. Those of us who put this mask on, we find our identity in achievement and success. Full disclosure, this is the mask I'm most comfortable in. This is the mask I pull out the most often. We have a switch that we flip and we're on, right? We can perform with the best of them, okay? I knew this was a problem for me from an early age. Y'all, I've just always loved music growing up. In my former life, I was a musician. I loved to sing. I loved to play guitar. And I was in the 6th grade. I formed a rock and roll band called Endangered Species. That name's trademarked, by the way. I'm holding on to it. And in middle school, we knew one song. And we played that one song for our middle school talent show. It was a banging rendition of AC/DC's You Shook Me All Night Long. We didn't even know what it meant. Anyway, but we sang it. There's a video somewhere. It's going to stay buried, just so you know that. But turns out, when you're in middle school and you're in a rock and roll band, you don't even have to be very good. And people love you. And I learned at a very young age that if I could sing and I could perform, all of a sudden I had value. And people liked me. And for you, it may not be music, all right? You might just be competition, or you are actually the best at what you do. I don't know what it is for you, but you love being the best at it. And when you do that thing, all of a sudden you have value now, and people like you. You ever define yourself by your achievement or by your success? If that's the case, there's a good chance that you wear a performer's mask like me. Mask number 2. Oh, I'm so sorry. I want to tell you what Paul said about that mask. Hang on. I want to tell you what Paul said about that mask. In Ephesians chapter 2, he said, God saved you by his grace when you believed, and you can't take credit for this. It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we've done. It's not about what we've achieved or accomplished. He says, so no one can boast about it. For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus, and so we can do good things planned out for us a long time ago. Paul said it's God who does the creating and the sustaining, and we are his masterpiece. It's not about our performance. But because he has made us and because he has saved us, he allows us to partner with him in good works, and we're able to do great things on his behalf, for his glory and my good. It's not about my performance. Mask number 2 is the pleaser mask. Right? Those who wear the pleaser mask, they intend to help everyone. Right? Everyone's going to get along. Everyone's going to have what they need. You people pleasers are on it. Right? Don't have to raise your hand. I already know who you are. I've met you. I've seen you in here. A lot of you are on the experience team. That's your natural gifting. You're like, I just want to help people. I love giving people what they need. And that particular part that you play, while good in intention, sometimes is broken in motivation. Because the pleaser in us doesn't always just want to please for the good of pleasing. We want something in return. And it usually looks like approval. We will give you whatever you need if you will just approve me. I will make sure you have everything that you possibly could ever want as long as I have value to you. And some of you have pursued people and done things to try and please them just for their approval, even at the expense of yourself. And that particular part that you play has sometimes given you that approval drug that you seek. And so we keep pleasing. And again, Paul told his mentee and friend Timothy, he said, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved. And what he means is as one who's already been found worthy. As one who knows who they are in Christ and doesn't need the approval of any person. And this morning, some of you, if you wear this pleaser mask, let me just remind you what the psalmist said in 149. He said, the Lord takes pleasure in his people. Full stop. Can you just sit in that for a second? The Lord takes pleasure in his people. Not in what they do, not in the peace that they make, not in the joy they bring to others, but the Lord takes pleasure in his people. Full stop. Maybe somebody just needs to hear that this morning. Mask number 3, perfecter mask. All right, the perfecter mask is worn by those who have a fear of being wrong. All right, perfecters are right all of the time. Perfecters believe the lie that they have it all together, and then in their family and in their work and in their home, there is constant pressure because no mistakes are allowed when we wear the perfecter mask. And they connect deep shame to any flaw that may just slip out. And while I have plenty of insecurities, for some reason God's blessed me. I don't have this one, some of you do. The Apostle Paul had this insecurity. When he wrote to the Philippians, he told them about who he was, and he exposed himself and his insecurities by being a perfectionist when he said these words. He says, you know my pedigree, a legitimate birth, circumcised on the 8th day, an Israelite from the elite tribe of Benjamin, a strict and devout adherent to God's law, a fiery defender of the purity of my religion, even to the point of persecuting the church. He says, I'm a meticulous observer of everything set down in God's law book. And then he says these very credentials that these people are waving around as something special. He said, I'm tearing them up and I'm throwing them out with the trash, along with everything else I used to take credit for. And why? Because of Christ. Yes, all the things I once thought were so important are gone from my life, and compared to the high privilege of knowing Christ Jesus, Paul says, all that I've achieved, I'm as close to being a perfect religious person as possible. I throw it all away compared to knowing Jesus. You see, perfection attempts to push away God. When we have it all together and we make no mistakes, there's no need or room for God. But in our weakness, God can do things in us that we never could accomplish on our own. Mask number 4, the power mask. All right, whenever our insecurity begins to creep up in us, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to power up or power down. Rarely do we say the same. And oftentimes, we power up with tone or with energy, or maybe even worse, with threats or even abuse. Okay, we see this in leaders all the time. Political leaders, coaches, teachers, even church leaders. Leaders have a tendency to mask their insecurities with the power mask. Okay, this type of behavior is often tied to an unhealed wound deep within inside the mask wearer. Someone, somewhere, has worn that mask in front of them, and they've learned how to behave that way. You've heard the phrase, hurt people, hurt people. And the bullied usually bully. Authority figures, leaders, parents, coaches, teachers, bosses will quickly grab this mask when their insecurities start to rise, just in an effort to hold on to the authority that's been given to them. And I want to show you what Jesus has to say about those in authority. In Matthew 20, he said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. So whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant." Jesus shows us that what servant leadership looks like. The one person that had every right to wear a power mask never does. Jesus models servant leadership for you and for me, to leverage his position and serve those around him. Finally, mask number 5, the pretender mask. Okay, you know anyone who happens to know everything about everything? Somebody who's experienced everything there is to experience. They've seen that movie, they've read that book, they've heard that podcast, they've ate at that restaurant. They're an expert on everything, whether they really are or not. And sometimes maybe even I can be that way. And maybe you can too. You see, my worth would disappear if someone knew more than I did, or someone had more than I do, or someone maybe experienced something I haven't experienced. And I love what Steve Carter says about the pretender. He says, pretending is always reaching and grasping, hoping that adding this false detail will finally allow you to fill in. I just want to be known. I just want to have value. And these masks that we carry around give us this small dopamine hit of approval and acceptance and value, so we carry them around and we keep pulling them out. You know, in a room like this, there's a really good chance that you have them. And I think if you're honest, some of these probably look more familiar to you than you even want to admit. And when we feel vulnerable, when we get exposed, it triggers in us all those insecurities that force us to either power up, flip the switch on, become someone we're not, or power down. We throw those comfortable masks back on in order to cope with just the hard reality of life around us. Man, here at Mission City Church, we exist. The whole reason we are together today is to help people find and follow Jesus. The word Jesus used for follower was disciple. And let me tell you what he said in John 8 when he said, Jesus said to the people who believed in him, he said, you are truly my disciples. You're really a follower of me if you remain faithful to my teachings. And then he says this. He says, and then you will know the truth, and that truth will set you free. Every one of us here today has an opportunity to lose the bag of masks. We have an opportunity to drop these masks that you and I have been carrying our entire lives. If we have a knowledge and understanding of truth. And here's the truth. Jesus says, if you've studied my teachings, if you've read anything about me, if you've paid attention to my life, if you've watched the way I've interacted with people, if you've noticed anything about me, here's what I want you to know. Here is the truth, that God so loved you. You in your mask, and you in your insecurity, and you in your exposed self, you in your mess, you as you are. God so loved you that he gave us Jesus to trade lives with him. Just like Adam and Eve in the garden, you and I have been found out. We are exposed. We have stepped out of the relationship that God had for us, and we've spent our lives trying to compensate from being out of that relationship. We walk around with these masks, desperately hoping that someone somewhere will remind us of our value. Will you just tell me I'm enough? Will you just remind me that I am okay? I'll be whoever you need me to be if you'll just tell me I have value. And Jesus says, I want to trade you lives. I want to take that mask from you. Jesus says, I'll take the mask. Let me have the shame. I'll take all the conviction. I'll take all the condemnation. I'll take all of your insecurities and I will wear them to a cross where they will die with me. And I will show you once and for all, you are valued. This is how much I love you. I'm going to trade all of that for you. And it's going to die with me. And when we know that truth, y'all, that truth sets us free. We don't have to be somebody we're not. We don't have to be hypocrites. We don't have to be actors. We can be real. Man, this morning, maybe you just need to hear this. You're enough. You're enough. And the cross is God's evidence of his great love for you. His demonstration of his love for you. It's his physical display of how he feels about you. You in your mask, you in your insecurity, you are loved by God. And you're enough. I pray this morning that that knowledge could set you free. You don't have to pretend to be somebody you're not. You don't have to be an actor anymore. We can lose these masks. Because he is who he says he is. And because you are who he says you are. Loved and valued. I want to introduce an idea to you. In a couple of weeks, we're going to celebrate Easter here, which is just a celebration of Jesus' resurrection, his conquering of sin and death. He took all of our insecurities, nailed them to a cross, and they died there with him, and then he walked out of a grave so that we could live forever. And so on Easter, when we celebrate that morning, we're going to have baptisms. And if you've never surrendered your life, if you've never traded your life with Jesus to say, I'm done with the masks, I'm done with the bags. I don't know how it's going to look, but I'm trusting you. If you've never said yes to Jesus, if you've never surrendered your life, I'm going to invite you to come Easter Sunday and be baptized here at Mission City. We want to celebrate with you. We want you to say yes to Jesus. This is why we exist, to help people find and follow him. And when he tells you you're valuable, will you take him at his word? Will you trust him? And will you trade lives with him? We can lose the insecurity game. We don't have to be actors anymore. You are enough. Will you stand to your feet? We're going to worship together. And we're going to sing a song that says, I will take you at your word. I will choose to believe what you have said about me. I will look at the cross and see your great love for me. We're going to sing this song in celebration. We're going to sing this song in response. If you would like to get baptized on Easter Sunday, I invite you to come find me. Tell me. I'd love to talk to you about what that means. If you've never been baptized, I invite you to stop by the tables. Tell someone at the table. And we'll help you figure out what it means to drop the mask, to trade lives, and to accept Jesus.